Welcome to the Simpleton Podcast, the most popular podcast in eternity. All right, well, Laura, today I think we'll start with a little bit of listener feedback. This is from Thomas, who's writing to us from Italy, a town named Aquinas. Actually, I think this is St. Thomas Aquinas.
Oh.
Right. He wrote and said that we should do less theology and more prayer. I think that's personal advice, not podcast advice. But
like he wants us to knock it off with the theology. Is that
I think most longtime listeners would agree with that. Yeah. Right. And
this is a Thomas Aquinas that is not from France, but from Italy, you're saying.
Are you embarrassing me?
Yeah.
The saint is from Italy.
Is he from Italy? He studied at University of Paris, though.
Yeah. Well, he taught there, right?
No. Oh, gosh.
All right.
Anyway.
All right. Fact check. Italian, Dominican friar and priest. All right, Laura.
There we go. I'm embarrassed.
I know. Laura's going to ask our editor to cut that out, but leave that in. Then Laura didn't know the country of St. Thomas Aquinas. All right. Well, there was also a PS. He wants us to talk more and raise awareness about vampires. Vampires are a problem, and we might touch on that today. But today we're going to go over the manual and what is the good news, part 2. So let's recap where we're at. In the last episode on the good news, we talked about what are the kind of real pieces of good news you get almost before you even start, like at the very beginning of creation. If you believe that an all-loving, all-powerful God created everything, what do you know?
What does that mean? Yeah.
What are some implications of that are good news? It means that you aren't needed because God doesn't have needs, but he has desires. And so you're wanted and not needed. That at first sounds a little bit bad, but it's way better to be wanted and not needed. And it's also interesting because it means you can't kind of screw anything up permanently because you're actually not needed for anything. You're just desired.
Yeah.
You know? So it kind of takes the worst case scenario off the plate that you might have been worried about. And he also can fix you because he's all powerful.
Yeah.
Right. We also know that when he created everything, that we're not an afterthought. We're not just one of many things. We're actually the center of this creation. And even though there's many of us, we're all very particularly valuable in the sense we're all the center. And that'll become clear like later in the Bible that he's valuing everyone individually. He's a God of Jacob, Isaac, and Abraham. He's not just a God of a people, which is many Old Testament gods were gods of people. It's not of individuals, not of persons, rather. And there's also this idea that we're not a beast, that there's a separation between an animal and a person. And animals are valuable, animals are good, animals are wanted by God, and we should respect that. But there's even a different respect of kind of like our role in creation than theirs. Different dignity and good news to that.
Yeah, and a responsibility of stewardship and
And a lot of these things become clear when put in the negative, right? Like if you say, "Oh, you're needed," well, then you screwed up, you know? Or or
if you stop being useful, we can get rid of you.
You're not needed anymore, therefore your existence is in question, right? Or you're not at the center of creation. He doesn't particularly care about you. You could be grist for the mill.
Yeah.
You know, like you could just be like chewed up in this thing and it doesn't matter because you're just kind of like collateral damage in creation. Or you could be, if you're not, if you're like a beast, then you could be used as a beast. And abused people often think of themselves this way, that like their value is the way they're being used by somebody else, you know? And so all those things are absolutely terrible mindsets. And Christianity is to call us and to like give us light out of those mindsets, you know, because this is really great good news. So that was last episode. And almost a good fraction of all our episodes on the manual so far have also been about Genesis, but have been about this one issue, which is this issue that God is searching for man in the garden after the fall.
And man is trying to hide.
Right. And so the early episodes on the manual is this idea that the principal human problem is a problem of lying and hiding and avoiding God, not a problem of needing to discover God. God's trying to discover us. So that's what most of the early episodes were about. And now we're going to get to the fall in a new way, and we're actually up to date. I'm still trying to get over Thomas Aquinas writing us.
Yeah. You're ecstatic or you're embarrassed?
Well, I mean, we know we have listeners. All right. I think we always knew we had Dominican listeners and we always knew we had heavenly listeners. I just didn't know that Venn diagram had an intersection, So, but it's nice to be popular. We also got to get on this vampire issue that he's concerned about. So,
yeah.
Which we all are, frankly. But, all right. So there are three ideas I want to introduce that are going to help people understand how we're unpacking Adam and Eve in the fall. Okay. So we already talked about the issue of getting out from behind the bushes, and we've explored that probably more thoroughly than anyone, I think. But let's talk about three other ideas. One idea is that, Christians are called to perfection, but can never actually achieve true perfection in this life. And this is kind of a weird problem we all have, right? And there's also this idea of kind of the widespread incompetence of even the greatest Christians. Like Peter, there's an old management book, I think it's about 20 years old now, called The Peter Principle, where the idea that motivated the book was, why is St. Peter so bad at his job? And also successful, but also bad at his job, right? Mm-hmm. And the thesis of the book, my understanding, this is one of those books in my mind that you don't read. You just have someone tell you what the thesis is. So I could be completely wrong. But the thesis of the book was, everyone, if you're really competent at your job, you get a promotion, and you're promoted all the way into a job you can't do anymore, which is interesting. Another idea to kind of seed this conversation with is that the very best punishments are inherently corrective, that I think we all find it more satisfying when the punishment kind of fits the crime, and the punishment also seems to correct either the harm of the crime or correct any future crime like that from happening, And I'm not necessarily against these other types of punishments and that they can't be fitting or fine, right? But it always seems better when, if you have a child misbehave, that you come up with something that like stops it from ever happening again. Yeah. And corrects any harm they did or teaches a powerful lesson, as opposed to just like, you did X, you receive pain, discomfort, or displeasure. You know what I mean? Parenting
ideas like natural consequences.
Sure. Right. Yeah. Right. So that's interesting, because we're going to kind of bring up whether or not the consequences of the fall are natural consequences that actually are the corrective measures, not just pure punishment. And then the last idea is something that St. Augustine summarizes as, oh, happy fault. And this is something that's hard for us to understand, but I think the way I think about it is, I remember we were at Exodus Ministries when I first had this thought, and I had to ask this Dominican who was leading the reflection. I go, hold it. Are you saying that the perfection in the Garden of Eden is different than the perfection of heaven, that these are different perfections? Mm-hmm. And the guy paused, and the guy was like, yes. And I think clearly this is the case, right? And there can be different things that are perfect. And in a way, the perfection of heaven, probably in a lot of ways, is going to be a greater perfection than the Garden of Eden. And that's why it's a no happy fault, because it made the way for that. Mm-hmm. So these are kind of interpretive tools that, saying them out loud, I think will help you understand what we're trying to do here. Do you have anything to add to that, Laura?
No, let's get into it.
Great. Adam and Eve are created. They're created with a certain job. Their job appears to be name things, walk around naked in the garden and enjoy it, and don't eat of that tree. So there's like three parts of this job. Eat
yummy fruit, yeah.
Eat yummy fruit.
Yeah.
Don't eat that fruit. Multiply. Yeah. All right. Well, they've got a complex job. Most of us don't find this Most of us find this almost embarrassing more than unattractive, though. Like, okay, like if that was our job, that's good, right? Well, what's interesting about this is that they were created to do that. Mm-hmm. And in fact, we were created to do that, meaning that we were given the way like a wolf is born to hunt. He was given the natural gift from birth to be able to like grow up and do that. We're given the grace as a natural gift, as like our inheritance to run around naked, name things, eat yummy food, fill the earth, you know? Mm-hmm. That's our like natural grace, right? So it's not like you had to walk around and pray for miracles every day to fulfill that job description, right? And then we meet this serpent, which is already interesting because like if the devil was really fallen, like why did that get into the perfect garden? Because then the garden wouldn't be perfect if it was whatever. I don't know. Thomas Aquinas can write us on that one because that would be I think he'd be the right guy to ask. The serpent, I think we should take him at face value, what he's offering humanity. He's hiding the consequences of his offer, but I think he's being honest about the offer itself, right? It's a trick, but it's not a lie in a sense, even though he's the father of lies. So do with that what you will. But
it's like you can eat of this tree and have knowledge of good and evil. That part is true. The trick is making Adam and Eve think that this will bring them happiness, fulfillment, etc.
Right. And he doesn't even have to sell that. They just jump to that conclusion, it appears, right? And he also says it will make you godlike. And we've already like skipped my major interesting point, I think, which is whenever I get these like spring break groups in, I go, what is original sin? And the answers are interesting. You get answers. There's pride. There's wanting to be like God. There's eating the apple. There's a lot of some people. It has to be said out loud. Original sin is not sex, you know? So you get all these answers, right? But the one that's like that idea of like wanting to be like God, you know, that's interesting because that is what the devil tells them. He says, this will make you like God. And that, you know, we all the time are calling each other to be Christ-like, to be God-like, to have God's perspective in a sense, right?
To be perfect like the Father in heaven is perfect.
Right. And that's the temptation. You know, or that's the sin. So there's kind of this weird issue of like, we're constantly telling each other that we need to be godlike. That's not a temptation. That's not a sin. That's actually the goal. But here it appears as a temptation, you know? And I think that the real issue here is that when we took this fruit, I think we actually did get the knowledge of good and evil, you know, and we did realize we were naked and we got the knowledge of good and evil, but it was like something that we weren't built for, right? There's no reason to think that your mind, your soul, your abilities were up to the task of managing that knowledge or even thinking clearly about it. You know, I think we've all had the situation where we judge someone very unfairly, you know, using all our knowledge of good and evil and condemning them or like judge them very unfairly. You know, like we're constantly tempted to use this knowledge of good and evil to judge and do these things. And we almost have to in a way, but it's also just a mess.
Yeah. I mean, right. We have to in a way, but it strikes me right now that it's the same desire to name things, but like now amped up with
right.
Yeah.
Like before we were just naming them and now we need to
were capable of that and asked to do that. And
even today, you know that there's certain things you need to evaluate and certain decisions you need to make. And there's certain just things that, you know, evaluating them's like a trap, you know?
Yeah, well, I think it's like when we want to damn things, you know, like I feel like that's the trap is like, it's like we can identify that something is evil or not, or a stumbling block or whatever. But when we want to damn it to hell for God, that's like beyond our.
That, and I think most people know that their own life is kind of a mess, like that they have had a really hard time determining what's the good and what's the bad. But then they'll be very eager to want to tell someone else how to live their life, and maybe that actually is true. Actually, maybe we are better at figuring out the good for someone else than the good for ourselves. Maybe that should be I had a sister whose idea was that we should create deals where we clean each other's houses because it's less annoying to clean someone else's mess up than clean your own.
100%. Yeah. Yeah.
So,
have you ever gotten this advice? Like, I find this very helpful. Like, I can't figure, I have plenty of advice to give everybody, but I'm like in a situation that I can't figure out. And I've gotten the advice before, like pretend you had a friend in that situation and what would you tell them to do? And a lot of times it gets a whole lot clearer,
Wow. That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So our minds are somehow not even capable of handling the gift that we chose for ourselves, that we're told not to choose for ourselves, but we did anyway. Right. And in a way, we took upon ourselves a job, kind of like this Peter Principle idea. We took a job that we are incompetent at, but we chose it. It wasn't, we fairly chose it. It's not just the devil's fault. It's our fault. We chose to have a job that we can't execute. And what's interesting about it is most of us wouldn't undo it. Most of us don't want to go back to being in the garden and just being naked and running around. Like most of us actually want to have the perfection God is asking us how God can you help us do this job? And that's
I think there's like, maybe something painful or sinful in your life, and it's like when you're well on the other side of it, would you want to undo that?
Right.
Sure, there's a few things I wish I wouldn't have said to someone or something, but like, it's hard if you overcome it. It's hard to think I want the thing that I was before. All of that.
The great point. So immediately after we do this, we're already realizing that we're incapable of this. We don't know how to hide our nakedness. We don't want to deal with God anymore because we know that we're inadequate to this task. So we want to hide our inadequacies, both our nakedness and literally just hide from God. And we also start passing the buck immediately. Like it's his fault. It's her fault, with this like passing of the buck with Adam and Eve, which is also the first kind of ego defense. Like we're kind of like trying to not admit that we have the problem that we have, right? And God realizes now that things are, at least the perfection is ruined.
Yeah.
And therefore there's some consequences to this. And these are punishments, these are corrections, these are just natural consequences, right? And one of the consequences is the garden's not perfect. It's just definitionally, mathematically true. You're not perfect. You're in the garden's not perfect, and so we need cast out of the garden, right?
Yeah.
And what's also true is God wants to fix the problem that we've created. He's not just like, okay, you created a problem, forever you have the problem, goodbye. He's like, okay, we're starting salvation history now,
Right.
And there has to be an end to your imperfection. And we call that end of imperfection death, right? And in the Christian life, we use this term death to mean like a conversion, where you're kind of dead to your old ways and try to be reborn in Christ. We use it for when a monk enters a monastery, that he becomes dead to the world. And we also use it for biological death, all of which are supposed to be bridges that you can't come back from. They're supposed to be like one-way gates. And they're also bridges that anyone on the other side of that has a problem really communicating to people who haven't crossed it. Like it creates such an enlightened change in the person, or such a transformational change in the person, that it's hard for them to explain why they're doing it to someone who's not already there. And biological death is the most mysterious of all of these, because it's so, we can't even, like communicating with people beyond that, it's not a normal thing. And it's Christ who like was perfect, crossed over to biological death and just came right back. And it's like, well,
just came right back.
I was perfect before, I'm perfect now, This is all very interesting, that we actually have to have death. we have to not eat of that tree of life, and we have to have death in order to have the possibility to become perfect again. Mm-hmm. It has to be such a breaking point with the imperfection that's why biological death was a necessity, right? Another issue here, there's some of the issues. So leaving the garden and biological death, mm-hmm. the two other ones I want to talk about are toil and work and pain and childbirth. I have nothing to say on pain and childbirth, so I'm going to let you talk about that, Laura. But I have a lot to say about work. Should we start with pain and childbirth or work?
You were trying to figure out how pain and childbirth helps us get back to God. And I don't know totally, but the thing that most strikes me is as parents, it's we love our children more than anything, and we also love them imperfectly. And some parents are really bad at loving their children, but the very first the act that brought you into the world is an act of love and sacrifice. And I think that is significant.
You had this idea before mm-hmm. about why don't all women take the pain medications to try to get rid of the pain in childbirth?
Yeah.
If you could just not have that, why not just not have that? Right,
why not just have that? And but yet many women choose
there's a huge number of women who are preferring a natural childbirth.
I have had both medicated and unmedicated births, and in my labors that were medicated, I'm really grateful that I had that option. And one of them, it's hard even to think of what would have happened had I not had that option. So but the unmedicated childbirth, labor and delivery, there's if you can accept what is happening into your body and go with it and work with it, it kind of becomes in my experience, because maybe I'm kind of sports oriented, it's this sort of amazing athletic feat, and you can sort of transcend the pain a little bit by giving into it and working with it, and it becomes a much easier process. But then my unmedicated deliveries had this euphoria after that I did not have in my medicated deliveries, and of just love, outpouring for this little baby, it's I was in this extreme sort of thing, and it's all forgotten because now you have this little wonderful thing that you're just completely euphoric. Why am I saying all that? I don't know. That even in the pain of childbirth, there's this transformative thing that can happen, and that's interesting. And it's if you choose to not have the pain in childbirth, there's a thing that is lost. And again, I'm not trying to criticize, and obviously it's great that we have ways to get through difficult childbirths or traumatic childbirths or whatever. But
I think that's well put. It's interesting because you're showing kind of this positivity where it's not just punishment.
Yeah, it's a thing that you don't want to go through, but then is amazing when you do.
And it's kind of, and maybe it's not too much to say it's a little bit redemptive.
Yes. Yeah. The first unmedicated childbirth I had, it was the most amazing thing I had ever done in my life.
That's amazing. Right.
Yeah.
Let's go to toil and work. So somehow work, I've heard people argue that work existed before the fall, and maybe it did, and maybe all that work was naming things. I don't know. But work and this toil has this goodness to it that I think we all sense at this point that it's almost necessary for prayer.
Yeah.
That it's through that work, you get to participate in meaning and purpose, not as needed, but as you get to, and it creates a possibility of a spiritual life. And do you got something to add to that right away?
Yeah. Well, I just, as was there work in the garden or whatever? An image that comes to mind is a person that has kind of decorative flowers in their lawn that kind of snips this and snips that versus like a farmer that's like trying to provide for himself and maybe a whole bunch of other people. Like it's like a different kind of work.
Right. And I think we have a deep desire for that. I think Christianity offers that work to people also. I think like one of the things I think is that, like Christianity offers the amount of adventure and responsibility and work that a Napoleon took on himself, but it purposes it towards the good, right? And I would much rather be around people who are ambitious for the kingdom than people who want to just chillax in the kingdom. You know? Like
I think we've seen like in different seminaries, like sometimes the formators are kind of happy when the guys like start working out or doing something, because there's like something weird about seeing a young man not putting his like body into something, that there's like something healthy and good,
Right. I've always found working out to be kind of a funny thing, because it goes to vanity like so dang quick.
So fast,
yeah. And it also is like very non-productive. Like it helps your health, right? But like, couldn't we like roof a house? Isn't there a way that I could do something? Like, could I like haul gravel today, like just for an hour? And like get something done and improve my health, I
think it's like working out is actually kind of like a shortcut that we take because we're not farmers anymore.
It is a shortcut. There's a great scene in like Back to the Future when he's visiting cowboys and they're talking about people running for exercise, and the cowboys are like, what?
Yeah.
And we have such sedentary jobs now, but shouldn't there be like a gym that's called like Roofer Gym? And then you show up and they put you on the roof and you work for an hour. And then the next guy comes in for his gym session at 2:00 and he works for an hour on the roof, and we all get a good workout and we get a roof done, or hauling gravel or whatever it is, or digging a ditch, But like, working out. I mean, I even believe in working out. I'm just saying it's always hit me as strange. And it's also strange when someone really does a lot of working out, particularly if they're a priest or something. You're like,
why is
what's going on here?
Yeah. I think it's,
shouldn't you be a little bit fat?
Okay, right. You shouldn't be so svelte, but a young man should use his body for something too. And if it's like the heck he has to do that is work out, I'm like for it rather than sitting around relaxing.
All right, we're kind of off topic now. I'm going to get to the real problem here. So the real problem is Uber Eats, and vampires. And I'm not kidding. All right. And I love that I've been floating this idea around friend circles and like little men's circles for a couple months, and they all vehemently disagree, and they all come up with reasons why Uber Eats can be justified. But I think they also understand what I'm saying. So I don't care that their minds are churning on the exceptions. But like, I have this idea that like we need to have like an intervention team follow Uber Eats, because like there's some guy like in his house or some couple, and they've gotten themselves so darn comfortable that they're like binge watching, something on Netflix or Game of Thrones or something, or they're like, sucked into World of Warcraft or whatever it is, that they can't even procure food. And then this 40-year-old man whose life has not worked out for him, and he doesn't like being around others and wants to like be independent, and he's willing to, fat finger your food for you. He'll bring you cold Wendy's to your door. Okay. This is like so tragic. This is how vampires are created. They're in their crypt and they're going to become carnivores and go eat people. But like, we need to like have like a couple like offensive linemen, like run in the house, be really jolly, take the guy outside, throw the football with him, actually go to a grocery store or to a little outside cafe and eat, with him, so he can like start like getting life back in him, so that the sunlight will destroy the vampire,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I'm not really kidding. You know what I mean? And but the thing that's been interesting about the process of thinking through the Uber Eats problem is, I have theology. I know that love is a sin in our life. I know that marriage and you shouldn't use contraception, et cetera, right? If you're sucked into Game of Thrones trance, none of that matters.
Mm-hmm.
If I come in there and try to have a conversation with you about any of the great things in life, it's an irrelevant. If I have that conversation and then leave and you turn back on Game of Thrones or whatever it is, or World of Warcraft, which is not, maybe World of Warcraft's not inherently bad. I'm not really against it if you do it in some regulated way and don't get sucked into the vortex. But like, all of that evangelization is completely empty because somehow there's so little work in your life. There's so little real toil work that you can't understand what I'm saying in any real way. It's merely an idea, right? And you have to get yourself out there and, I don't know, like do a little bit of work, or, get out there in the sunlight, to open yourself. You have to get out of that comfort, that coddle place, to be able to receive evangelization. It's like a necessity of salvation.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't think we're ever going to have a saint that sat in his mom's basement playing computer games all day. Unless he had some other thing going on, like he was a paraplegic. Then you could, So I think we've said most of what we want to say, but let's just kind of recap what this was about. What we did was we're unpacking this idea of the fall of man. And we have this idea that man took the knowledge of good and evil, and it did make him more like God. But he wasn't built with the natural grace to execute that, to do that. And therefore it requires grace that's not in you right now to start behaving like God with the knowledge of good and evil. It requires that grace that is not natural grace, but is supernatural. That's like lightning bolts from outside the system coming into you to do that. And it even requires more than that, is what we found out. Like, we're going to go through salvation history in the podcast. We do this slowly. We got to interject with a bunch of political commentary in the middle. But we're going to go through salvation history. And it's the story of man coming to grips with the problem that he took on.
Yeah.
In the ultimate kind of end of salvation history is not Christ's birth or the Virgin Mary. That's the beginning of the end. The Virgin Mary's Immaculate Conception is the beginning of the end. It's perfection being reintroduced into imperfection, And it's not Christ's death. It's not Christ's resurrection. It's actually Pentecost. Like, the thing that makes us be able to handle the job we can't handle is an indwelling of the Holy Spirit. And that's to jump to the conclusion. So that was spoiler alert. But that's really what it's all about, is becoming godlike, because God actually executes the job within you through an indwelling. It's really the only solution. There's no way you get good enough through, like, if your job in life is seen as build virtue so you can be more godlike, you will never measure up.
Yeah.
Cutting out sin and building virtue. Yeah, that's work you need to do. That is not the solution. Yeah. The solution is the indwelling of the Holy Spirit. Yeah.
Like, salvation history is like playing out of a great love story. And there's like no great love story that doesn't, have its like work and struggle and, Yeah.
I would like to kind of end it at that. So, canonized saints do write us letters into the podcast. But if you're an uncanonized saint, you should also feel free to write us letters. We got corrections from some uncanonized saints a couple of podcasts ago we addressed. So please write the Simpleton Podcast. All right. Share it around. Talk to you later, Laura.
All right. See you later, Clark.
All right. Peace out. Bye.